Welcome back to Conflicts of Interest. This is episode 601. I'm the host of the show, Kyle Anzalone. We have a lot of really awful news to talk about from the past weekend, so I'm just going to get right into it. Want to remind people to share the show at the Libertarian Institute, or we post the show on the blog at antiwar.com, YouTube, Rumble, or Odysee for the video version of the show. Of course, it's up anywhere you can listen to audio podcasts, and you can always follow my work by following me on Twitter at @KyleAnzalone_. I post all the shows as well as all the articles I write. Got a couple articles up here about Haiti and Kenya to kick things off today. Biden to make Kenya a major non-NATO ally as country delays armed deployment to Haiti. So President Joe Biden announced the U.S. would make Kenya a major non-NATO ally, MNNA, during a presidential meeting with President William Ruto while he was in Washington, D.C. Countries that become MNNAs receive more access to American training, weapons, and technology. In exchange for Ruto agreeing to send Kenyan forces to Haiti, Biden lavished Nairobi with an upgraded military relationship. So on Thursday, Biden informed Congress of his intent to make Kenya the 19th MNNA. This is what a letter from the White House to the Capitol said. Kenya is one of the U.S. government's top counterterrorism and security partners in sub-Saharan Africa, and the designation will demonstrate that the U.S. sees African contributions to global peace and security as equivalent to those of our major non-NATO allies in other regions. Becoming an MNNA will significantly upgrade Kenya's military ties with the U.S. Nairobi will get access to advanced U.S. weapons training and technology. The arms include depleted uranium tank rounds. The State Department Human Rights Report on Kenya in 2023 found the government forces had engaged in significant and credible acts of arbitrary or unlawful killings, including extrajudicial killings, enforced disappearances, forced disappearance, cruel, torture, or inhumane or degrading treatment or punishment by the government. It also notes Nairobi did not improve its human rights practices last year. So they're saying that from 2022 to 2023, there was no improvement. You could probably look back further than that and find the same thing. Still, the Biden administration has increased its military relationship with Nairobi to incentivize the Kenyan government to send its troops to Haiti. Washington hopes the armed Kenyan force will return order to the U.S.-backed government in Port-au-Prince. As many as 1,000 Kenyan troops are scheduled to arrive in Haiti in coordination with Ruto's meeting with Biden. However, according to Reuters, that deployment has been delayed with no clear timeline. While the reason for the delay at the time of this writing was unclear, one source said that the conditions in Port-au-Prince were not conducted to receiving armed men. I'll get into that a little bit more with the next article. The Washington-installed government in Port-au-Prince supports the deployment, but Haitians are resisting the armed foreign troops. Haitian citizens protested the government over the plan. It's also important to note here that after Ariel Henry, who was the prime minister installed by the U.S. in Haiti after the former president, Jovenel Moïse, was killed in July of 2021. So Henry wasn't even in the government at that time, and the U.S. really just gets Claude Joseph, who was then the prime minister, to step aside and make room for Ariel Henry. Ariel Henry just lost more and more control over Port-au-Prince during his time as prime minister, and eventually he went to the U.S. and went to the UN and begged for an international force to get deployed to Haiti. Now, the Haitian people didn't like this, and rightfully so. The last time UN peacekeepers were in Haiti, they caused a cholera outbreak that killed 10,000 people because they dumped their wastewater into drinking water, and this caused a massive outbreak. Additionally, and maybe even more significantly, they engaged in rampant sexual abuse against the Haitian women. This was multiple different kinds of forms. Some of it was just the peacekeepers would go, they would meet a woman, say, I'll take care of you. They get her pregnant, have a baby, then leave the country, never to help her again. At other times, it was just outright and explicit rape, or they would impregnate girls that were under the age of 18. So there was a lot of really disgusting stuff going on the last time the UN deployment was in Haiti. And so plenty of reasons why the Haitians don't want them to come back. Now, when Ariel Henry tried to leave Haiti a few months ago, I want to say this was maybe March, April, he went to Kenya to sign a deal with Ruto that, from my understanding, seems like an American status of forces style agreement, which basically would protect the Kenyan troops from much punishment from any Haitian courts or anything like that should they engage in any wrongdoing, which undoubtedly will happen. And when Henry tried to return to Haiti, these armed paramilitary groups that just are typically labeled as gangs, and I think, maybe some of them did come out of a gang founding, although they do seem to operate more as paramilitary groups as far as I could tell. And calling them that gives them, I don't want to say more legitimacy, but when you're thinking about a gang, you are thinking about just a group of criminals, right, with no other aspirations, where I think some of these leaders of these paramilitary groups really do have aspirations on gaining more security over the country and maybe becoming or the sole government of the country. So there is a lot going on here. But when Henry couldn't return to Haiti, because these paramilitary groups were taking things like the ports and the airports, he was forced to resign by Washington. Secretary of State Antony Blinken actually called him and told him that he had to resign. Now, the new government that the U.S. facilitated for Haiti, that, we said that, we want people from this sector and that sector and that sector. But the one thing that we required was that they support the armed deployment to Haiti. All right, next up here, this one, May 26th, the Libertarian Institute. I wrote this one. White House calls on Kenya to expedite armed deployment to Haiti. So, responding to the death of 2 American missionaries in Haiti, the White House is pushing Kenya to rush armed men to Port-au-Prince. The U.S. is providing funding and training for about 1,000 Kenyan troops that will be sent to Haiti and transfer authority to a Washington-created government. On Tuesday night, 2 American missionaries were shot and killed in Port-au-Prince. The White House responded by asking Kenyan President William Ruto to expedite the deployment of armed Kenyan forces that are officially labeled as police officers. So if you read this in the mainstream media, they will often talk about this being a situation of gangs and police officers. I think this is a very nefarious but effective propaganda tactic that's being deployed by our mainstream media and White House, and Kenya's involved in this as well. Rather than saying that there's paramilitary forces that are vying for control in Haiti, in Port-au-Prince, and we're going to send armed Kenyans in, we're saying, oh, this is a gang problem, and we're sending in police officers. It's very misleading. All right, so this is the National Security Council spokesperson on Friday said that the security and situation in Haiti cannot wait. President Biden pledged support to expedite the deployment of the Kenyan-led force in talks with Ruto on Thursday. The Kenyans were scheduled to deploy to Haiti last week, which coincided with Ruto's meeting with President Joe Biden in Washington. During the summit, Biden said he would make Kenya the 19th major non-NATO ally. The title gives Kenya additional access to U.S. weapons technology and training. However, Nairobi postponed the deployment due to concerns about the base that will accommodate its police force. One Kenyan speaking with the AP said that the facility was still under construction and did not have vehicles. The Joe Biden administration has been working for years to deploy an international armed force to Haiti. The White House hopes the Haitian police will be able to take power from the paramilitary groups and transfer it to the government formed by Washington. And so this just sounds like the stupidest nation-building project that we've come up with in recent time. For some people who may be asking why Kenya, which is a question that I had as well. One is they were willing to do it. The U.S. first tried to get countries in this hemisphere, put a lot of pressure on Ottawa, looked down south to Mexico and some of the Caribbean and South American nations as well, and couldn't get anyone on board. At the UN Security Council, when they debated this, a lot of the countries that supported this, what Haiti, what the US, what Kenya all said, was essentially that because both the Haitians and the Kenyans are Africans, this is somehow going to work better. There's no common language. Why would you send a police force to a country without a common language? The Kenyan forces are notorious for human rights abuses. Why would you send them to Kenya or Haiti, excuse me? So this is going to be an absolute stupid disaster, and I feel really bad for the Haitian people who are going to suffer under this. All right, next up here. Blinken pushing to let Ukraine hit Russian territory with U.S. weapons. Oh, man, say it ain't so, Dave. This one from our good friend Dave DeCamp at antiwar.com, May 23rd. Secretary of State Antony Blinken is leading a push with the Biden administration to allow Ukraine to use U.S.-provided missile systems and other weapons to hit Russian territory. The report said there was vigorous debate within the administration in the wake of Russia's new offensive in Kharkiv, which was launched over the border in Russia's Belgorod Oblast. It's unclear how many high-level officials agree with Blinken, but the pressure is growing on President Biden to lift prohibition on Ukraine using U.S. weapons on Russian territory, a ban that, according to the Times, is designed to avoid World War III. House Speaker Mike Johnson and many members of Congress are calling to lift the ban. Ultra-hawk Victoria Nuland, who left the State Department in March, appeared on NBC this week to make a pitch for Ukraine to extend its use of U.S. weapons to Russian territory. So Nuland said, I think there's also going to be a question here whether we, the United States, and our allies ought to give them more help in hitting Russian bases, which heretofore have not been willing to do. I think if the attacks are coming directly from over the line in Russia, those bases ought to be fair game, whether they are missiles are being launched from or where the troops are being supplied from. And that was all from Nuland. And so I think there's a couple important things here. And I made this point last week when I was on with Judge Andrew Napolitano on his show, Judging Freedom. If you haven't checked out my latest appearance, please do so. I think I did a pretty good job last week, and me and the judge had a great conversation. So when we're talking about Nuland's remarks here, I think this shows that maybe she still does have some sway in Washington. She said this, at the beginning of last week on Sunday, and then you have Mike Johnson and Antony Blinken apparently coming out and making these same points. And particularly for Blinken, he has a lot of sway here. I mean, Mike Johnson is the Speaker of the House, but he is a member of the opposition party where, Blinken is, as far as I could tell, one of the real driving forces behind the U.S. foreign policy under the Biden administration. So Moscow recently warned the UK that if Ukraine and use British weapons on Russian territory, Russian forces would target UK military sites in Ukraine and beyond. The warning came after the British Foreign Secretary David Cameron said Ukraine had the right to use British arms in attacks on Russia. And of course, that's not necessarily a lie, right? That if Ukraine wants to, it certainly could hit back at Russia, given the fact that Russia is waging a war against Ukraine. The problem here is that when the West is helping Ukraine to do this, it's really risking escalating this war way, way out of control. Additionally, there are things that the West could do short of provoking this war to a higher, degree, by simply being willing to negotiate with Russia, and we will talk about that next. So, you know what? I want to actually mention this Stoltenberg one first because it's pretty similar. Stoltenberg joins calls for NATO weapons to be used on Russian territory. So on Friday, NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg joined calls for Ukraine to be able to use NATO-provided weapons to strike Russian territory, a step that would mark a significant escalation in the proxy war. So this is Stoltenberg's comment. The time has come for allies to consider whether they should lift some of the restrictions they have put on the use of these weapons they have donated to Ukraine, especially now when a lot of the fighting is going on in Kharkiv, close to the border, to deny Ukraine the possibility of using weapons against legitimate military targets on Russian territory is very hard for them to defend themselves, he added. It's also worth noting that Ukraine certainly is conducting cross-border attacks. They hit apparently some Russian radar that's used to detect potential incoming nuclear strikes. So that's concerning. They've also bombed a lot of civilian targets within Russia. And so it's not as easy as saying that, oh, we just need to um that we just need to allow Ukraine to do this, because they are already doing it. It's not making a massive difference. Now, I guess what they're really asking for is probably US help with targeting, intelligence, and things like that, where the US would actually help Ukraine pit targets in Russian territory to hit, and that would be a monster escalation and could really lead to a World War III scenario. All right, next up here, this one I wrote for antiwar.com on May 24th. Putin willing to end war along current front lines. So as Russian forces are capturing more territory in eastern Ukraine, President Vladimir Putin is willing to end the war across the current front lines, according to Reuters. Ukrainian officials rejected the offer. Four sources speaking with Reuters said that Putin was prepared to freeze the war along the current front lines, but was willing to keep fighting if Ukraine and its Western backers rejected the offer for negotiations. So this is what one source said. Putin can fight for as long as it takes, but Putin is ready for a ceasefire to freeze the war. When asked by Reuters about talks, Putin personally responded, "Let them resume." The sources speaking with Reuters said that the Russian leader is prepared to assess the territory that has been captured as a victory. Putin will say that we won, that NATO attacked us and we kept our sovereignty, and that we have a land corridor to Crimea, which is true, another source said. The offer for the end of the conflict comes as Ukraine is struggling to find enough men to fight off the advancing Russian forces, and the West is unable or unwilling to provide Kiev with enough arms. The Ukrainian Foreign Minister, Dmytro Kuleba, quickly dismissed the idea of negotiations with Russia. Putin currently has no desire to end his aggression against Ukraine. Only principled and united voice of global majority can force him to choose peace over war, he said. Since the start of the war in 2022, Russia has captured and annexed 4 regions in southern and eastern Ukraine. In April of that year, Moscow and Kiev nearly inked a deal that would have allowed those 4 regions to remain a part of Ukraine in exchange for Kiev's neutrality. However, Zelensky, encouraged by his Western backers, refused the deal. Zelensky later signed a decree banning any negotiations with Putin. So this is unfortunate that, this offer isn't being seriously considered given what's going on, how poorly this war is going for Ukraine, but it is unsurprising nonetheless. All right, next up here, this one from Dave DeCamp. U.S. gives Ukraine new $275 million weapons package. So on Friday, the Biden administration announced a new $275 million weapons package for Ukraine, including ammunition for HIMARS rocket systems, artillery shells, anti-tank weapons, and other types of military equipment. The weapons are being provided under the Presidential Drawdown Authority, which allows Biden to ship weapons straight from U.S. military stockpiles to Ukraine. Since President Biden signed the bill into law last month, that included $61 billion for the proxy war in Ukraine, his administration has used over $9 billion to send weapons to Ukraine. The most significant package was worth $6 billion using the Ukrainian Security Assistance Initiative, which allows the U.S. to purchase weapons for Ukraine. It also means that those weapons take more time to get there. The latest package comes as Russia is making gains across the front, including its new offensive in Kharkiv. The U.S. aid is only expected to prolong the conflict and not help Ukraine achieve victory, as Russia has made significant advantages in manpower and weapons production and is using electronic warfare to make U.S. weapons ineffective. And so here is just a quick list of the $275 million package, which is, of course, just a portion of the at least $51 billion in weapons the U.S. has sent to Ukraine since February of 2012. And it includes ammunition for HIMARS, 155 millimeter and 105 millimeter artillery rounds, 60 millimeter mortar rounds, tow missiles, Javelin and AT-4 anti-armor systems, precision aerial munitions, small arms, and additional rounds of small arm ammunition and grenades. I have read that frontline soldiers are reporting that they lack small arms ammunition. demolition munitions, anti-armor mines, tactical vehicles to recover equipment, helmets, body armor, and chemical, biological, radiological, nuclear protective equipment, spare parts, maintenance, and other ancillary equipment. All right. So I think this is the last Russia story I have here. Russian jamming made some U.S. weapons ineffective in Ukraine. Russian electronic warfare has rendered some U.S.-made precision-guided weapons ineffective on the battlefield in Ukraine, causing Ukrainian forces to stop using certain munitions altogether, the New York Times reported on Saturday. One weapon that the U.S. forces stopped use due to the Russian jamming was the Excalibur GPS-guided artillery shells. According to internal Ukrainian military report, the Excalibur shells were very successful at hitting targets when the U.S. first sent them in 2022, but the success rate dropped to as low as 5% as the GPS systems were very susceptible to Russian electronic warfare. The Washington Post reported that Ukraine reported the problem to the U.S. and that Washington responded by ending its supply of Excalibur shells to Ukraine. Several other U.S. weapons suffered a similar fate on the battlefield in Ukraine, with success at first and failure once Russia adapted. When the U.S. first sent HIMARS to Ukraine in 2022, it was touted as a game changer in the war. The HIMARS were armed with GPS-guided missiles in a range of about 50 miles, and by the second year of their use in Ukraine, the Ukrainian officials said everything ended. The Russians deployed electronic warfare, disabled satellite signals, and HIMARS became completely ineffective. The U.S. recently began providing Ukraine with Army tactical missile systems, ATACMS, which have a range of about 190 miles and can be fired from HIMARS. Ukraine has had some success with them so far, but Ukrainian military expects Russia to be able to jam ATACMS soon. Another munition Ukraine has stopped using due to Russian jamming is the ground-launched small diameter bomb, a precision-guided Boeing-made munition with a range of about 94 miles. And so, these were all touted as game changers, things that were really going to help Ukraine when this was first announced, and have all now shown to be pretty ineffective. So Ukraine has also had trouble with JDAMs, which are precision-guided bomb kits dropped from aircraft. According to the Post, the weapons manufacturer provided Ukraine with a patch, and JDAMs became more effective, at least for the time being. But I think we're going to see here that Russia is going to continue to adapt and figure out how to take out these Western weapon systems. And so this is really, probably making Russia far more prepared for any potential conflict with the West than they were before. All right, here we go. News on Gaza. First up is an article I wrote on May 25th for antiwar.com. U.S. vessels supporting Gaza pier wash ashore. So 4 vessels, part of the U.S.-built pier stretching from Gaza thousands of feet into the Mediterranean Sea, have broken off and washed ashore. In early March, President Biden used his platform at the State of the Union to order the military to create a sea route to bring aid to the starving Palestinians. Nearly 3 months later, the pier has been faced with a series of cost overruns, injuries, and other setbacks. On Saturday morning, rough seas broke off 4 vessels that appeared to be serving as part of the pier. The vessels broke free from their moorings, and 2 vessels are now anchored on the beach near the pier. A 3rd and 4th vessel are on the beach on the coast of Israel near Ashkelon. The efforts to recover the vessels are underway with assistance from the Israeli Navy, and that's a statement from CENTCOM. So if you look at pictures, initially it was reported that the pier itself had broken apart and that parts of the pier had washed ashore. I'm less certain of that now. It appears that 2 tugboats, which I think are actually landing craft that are serving as, that the White House are saying as are serving as tugboats, broke free, as well as 2 like flat bottom barge type ships. And I think those ships are responsible for maybe bringing the aid from the little pier they have dock floating thing out 5 to 6 miles in the Mediterranean Sea, and actually bring those to the pier, and then they tie off to the pier, and the tugboats help to keep the landing vessels keep everything in line. And so I don't think that any actual part of the pier that was a solid piece broke off. I think these vessels that are supporting the pier broke off from being tethered and washed ashore. So, the Pentagon claims no soldiers will enter Gaza to recover the pieces of the pier, and the Israeli military is helping to recover the 4 vessels. The Department of Defense said no one was injured in the incident, and the pier is still fully functional. However, I think what this does show is how ineffective the pier is, because anytime you have rough weathers, not only can you not conduct any kind of operations, right? Imagine if you had a truck driving down this small, narrow pier, and the waves and winds and everything are so rough that it's breaking the ship's tethered to it off. Obviously, the pier is probably moving around a lot, and you can't drive on it. So, this seems to demonstrate the overall ineffectiveness of the pier, even if it didn't break into a bunch of pieces, as some people had initially said. So, since Biden announced the pier, whose cost has doubled, has resulted in 3 U.S. soldiers being injured, 1 seriously, and very little aid entering Gaza. The U.S. hopes that 150 trucks of aid will enter Gaza each day through the pier. However, during the first week of operations, only 21 trucks of assistance reached the strip through the pier. 41 trucks were reported to have been delivered by May 23rd. So, according to the Wall Street Journal, the process the aid must go through to enter Gaza via the sea route has a serious potential pitfalls. In Cyprus, a series of potential pitfalls, and this is what the Wall Street Journal describes as the process the aid has to go through. In Cyprus, the aid is screened and packaged into shipping pallets. A large military or commercial ship then transports the pallets some 200 miles across the Mediterranean Sea to a floating platform built by the U.S. There, the pallets are put onto trucks, which are driven onto smaller military vessels that could carry them about 6 miles to the floating U.S.-built causeway secured to the beach by the Israeli Army engineers. The trucks then drive a few hundred feet down the causeway and onto the beach in a zone protected by Israeli soldiers, and workers transfer the pallets onto separate fleet of trucks that are used by aid groups to complete the final leg of the warehouse and distribution points inside of Gaza. The trucks that do make it into Gaza have faced restrictions placed by the Israeli military, and starving Palestinians have looted the trucks. The lack of aid reaching Gaza is not the only problem the pier has encountered. On Thursday, the Pentagon reported 3 U.S. soldiers suffered non-combat injuries. Additionally, Biden has been criticized by human rights groups for choosing to set up a complex sea route when he could pressure Israel to allow more aid into Gaza by land, a far faster and more effective method. The spokesperson for UN Chief Antonio Guterres said the World Food Program explained, "What we want to see, as we've been saying, is a massive amount of aid coming through land routes. The pier's latest failure comes as nearly all 2.3 million Palestinians in Gaza are struggling to find anything to eat, with many already suffering in famine conditions. Several aid distribution agencies in Gaza have shut down over a lack of supplies caused by the Israeli military operations." So it doesn't seem like it's going to get better anytime soon. This one from Dave DeCamp, May 26th, antiwar.com. Report: IDF negotiator says there will be no hostage deal under Netanyahu government. An Israeli military officer involved in the indirect negotiation of the hostage deal with Hamas has expressed frustration with the government of Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu, according to a report from Israel's Channel 12. The report said that Major General Anzalone told Israeli military officials that Israel wouldn't reach a deal with Hamas under the current government. "We are desperate with this government formation. There will be no deal," he said. Alon also explained that it would be possible for the military operations in Gaza, even if Israel agreed to a deal that would include a commitment to a permanent ceasefire, which has been Hamas's main demand. Netanyahu has repeatedly rejected the idea and continues to vow he will eradicate Hamas, a goal the U.S. believes is unrealistic. Alon said, "The deal I'm pushing would provide for the return of all hostages, while Hamas insists that it must provide an end to the war. I told the Prime Minister it will be possible to return to fighting at any given moment." In response to the report, the IDF insisted Alon was taken out of context. General Alon was asked a question by the public about the effect of the political leadership has on the talks, and he answered that as one uniform, he cannot answer such questions. The IDF spokesperson said Netanyahu's office released a statement criticizing the comments. "The clashes from within the negotiating team only strengthen Hamas's position, harms the families, and distance the release of our hostages," Netanyahu's office said. So that comes as we had the World Court ordering Israel to halt military operations in Rafah. I wrote this one for the antiwar.com on May 24th. The International Court of Justice, the ICJ, or the World Court, ruled that Israel must halt military operations in Rafah. The court made the ruling after South Africa appealed to the court to take action, as the Israeli military in the southern operation in the southern region of Gaza has displaced nearly 1 million people and prevented aid deliveries. Tel Aviv said the court's decision would not stop Israeli forces from achieving their objectives in Gaza. On Friday, the ICJ president announced the court had ruled 13-2 that Israel must halt military operations in Rafah, open border crossing to aid deliveries, and allow investigators into Gaza. The ruling came after oral arguments from South Africa, who requested the ICJ order Tel Aviv to halt the offensive. And then Israel also was a part of those oral arguments. So late last year, Pretoria initially filed accusations of genocide against Israel in the World Court. In January, the ICJ issued a preliminary ruling that is plausible that Israel is committing a genocide against the people of Gaza, but stopped short of ordering Israel to halt military operations in the Strip. After Israel launched an assault on Rafah earlier this month, South Africa asked the court to issue an explicit ruling ordering Israel to halt the offensive. Prior to the court's ruling, Israeli officials said they would not comply with any demand to halt the offensive. The ICJ is the court for the UN. All members of the UN, including the US and Israel, are subject to its rulings. However, a government spokesperson told Reuters that no power on earth can stop the Israeli onslaught in Gaza. American officials have also targeted the ICJ for its ruling. This was Senator Lindsey Graham, what he posted on X immediately after. "As far as I'm concerned, the ICJ can go to hell. The ICJ's ruling that Israel stop operations that are necessary to destroy 4 battalions of Hamas killers and terrorists who use Palestinians as human shields is ridiculous. This will and should be ignored by Israel." And now this has also been come out and condemned by a lot of other important U.S. officials, including Antony Blinken, who agreed that he would work with Congress to come up with punishments for the ICJ for this. So Tel Aviv has lost much of its international support, as it has killed at least 35,000 Palestinians over the past 7 months. During that period, the White House has sent Israel thousands of bombs, and Congress approved another $17 billion in military aid for Tel Aviv. The operations in Rafah have displaced nearly 1 million Palestinians. The assault also closed the Rafah border crossing, bringing aid deliveries into the Strip to a trickle. The lack of food has caused some aid agencies to curtail or end distributions, pushing the people of Gaza closer to a famine. Now, a couple updates here. One, apparently about 200 aid trucks are prepared to enter Gaza from a land border crossing. So hopefully this happens. Hopefully this is good news. It was reported by Al Jazeera. So I think they're probably going ahead, and the trucks are probably starting to enter Gaza. Now, that's still for sure at least 500 trucks the UN is asking to bring to Gaza every day, and I'm sure there's going to need to be thousands of trucks every day brought into Gaza to possibly get these people living somewhat sustainable lives. But that that doesn't seem to be a real option anytime soon. Now, the other update I have, of course, is when we talk about people turning against Israel and how brutal the campaign has been, and how much the PR has been hurt. Last night in Rafah, I guess it would have been Sunday night in Rafah, one of the most horrific strikes of this war happened. Israel dropped a bomb, looked like a fairly large bomb. People are saying it's a 2,000-pound bomb. I'm not so sure. Large bomb dropped on a group of tents housing civilians in what was marked as a safe area. It blew children to pieces. This strike, absolutely horrific images. I'm not suggesting that anybody go out and check it out, but if you have any doubts about what I'm saying, you could go look for yourself. I'm not going to describe it in any more detail here, just because it is so unbelievably horrific. And of course, if something like that happened to Israel, American officials would be citing it, saying that I've seen the pictures of these mutilated children, and we have to give Israel another $20 billion in military aid or something as stupid like that. All right, so hundreds of Gaza's doctors are missing. The Intercept reports as early as November, reports emerged of doctors being detained and gone missing in North Gaza. According to the World Health Organization, at least 214 medical staff from Gaza have been detained by the Israeli military. In early May, the detentions and alleged torture of medical staff from Gaza made headlines when Israeli authorities announced the death of Adnan al-Brush, a well-known surgeon and the head of orthopedics at the Al-Shifa hospital. After being taken into custody in December, officials said al-Brush died in April while in Offer prison, an Israeli detention facility in the occupied West Bank. He is one of at least 493 Palestinian medical workers who have been killed in Gaza since October 7th, according to the Ministry of Health. The Israeli Defense Forces have systematically targeted hospitals from the north to the south of the Strip, claiming that Hamas operates in the facilities. Medical staff in Gaza hospitals have been repeatedly denied this claim. This week, Israeli forces have launched new attacks on the Kamal Adwan Hospital and the Al Adwa Hospital in the north, with reports Wednesday and Thursday of medical staff being detained from Al Adwa. And we're talking about here taking doctors, putting them in handcuffs, and throwing them in prison and torturing them. Absolutely horrific what Israel is doing. Last story up here today, this one from Dave DeCamp, May 23rd, antiwar.com. The Israeli Defense Minister, Yoav Gallant, announced on Wednesday that the broadening of a law that will allow Israelis to return to 3 settlements in the occupied West Bank that were dismantled in 2005. In 2005, 4 settlements were dismantled in the West Bank and 21 in Gaza, a move known as disengagement. Last year, the Israeli Knesset passed an amendment to the disengagement law, allowing for the return to 1 West Bank settlement, and Gallant's move allowed the settlements to return to the entire area, which is located in the northern West Bank between the Palestinian cities of Nablus and Jenin. The announcing the move, Gallant vowed that to do what he could to continue expanding West Bank settlements. Just as I have done in every position I've held in the government, I will continue to foster the settlements of Judea and Samaria, he said, using the biblical name for the West Bank. Gallant's announcement came on the day that Spain, Norway, and Ireland said they would recognize a Palestinian state. The over 500,000 Israeli settlers living in the West Bank and the expansion of the settlements are some of the main impediments to his 2-state solution. When the current Israeli government coalition was formed in December of 2022, it released a statement vowing to prioritize the expansion of West Bank settlements, with the ultimate goal being the annexation of the territory. Settlers have a very influential position in the government, including Finance Minister Bezalel Smotrich, who is also in the position as a minister in the defense ministry that gives him power to expand settlements. And then, of course, you also have Itamar Ben-Gvir, who is the national security minister, the leader of the Jewish Power Party, and a settler himself. After the Netanyahu coalition took power, violence against Palestinians in the West Bank spiked as the IDF stepped up its raids and settlers became emboldened and more violent. As a result, 2023 marked the deadliest year for Palestinians in the West Bank since the UN began counting casualties in 2006. This was even before October 7th. After October 7th, violence spiked as more settlers took advantage of the tensions and focused on Gaza to terrorize Palestinians living in the West Bank and steal their homes. Since then, at least 502 Palestinians have been killed by Israeli soldiers and settlers, and that's just in the West Bank alone. So horrific. All right, everybody, that's where I'm going to wrap up the show for today. Thank you all so much for tuning in. I will have a lot going on this week. I'll have a few different appearances and stuff like that. So please, tune in, keep up with the show, subscribe if you're not already, and you'll be a lot of great content and keep up with the news around the world.